Let me take you back to a quiet morning in Ridgehaven, a town where life moves at the pace of the sunrise and kindness is the currency of its people. My name is Edward Carter, a 92-year-old veteran of World War II. My days are simple breakfast at the diner, a good book, and a walk through memories of a life well lived. But one fateful day, the tranquil rhythm of my life collided with the chaos of a ruthless biker gang known as the Steel Wolves. They thought I was just another frail old man, easy to intimidate, easy to break. What they didn't know was that every wrinkle on my face, every ache in my bones, carried the weight of battles fought and won, not just on distant battlefields, but in the struggles of everyday life. What happened next would transform our small town and expose a web of crime and corruption far deeper than anyone imagined. This is a story of resilience, justice, and the unyielding spirit of a man who refused to back down, no matter the odds. If you're ready to hear a tale that will ignite your sense of justice and compassion, stay with me. And before we dive in, let me ask you this. What would you do if faced with injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to this channel if you believe in standing up for what's right. Together, let's shine a light on courage, community, and the power of never giving up. Now let me take you to the moment where it all began. It was an unassuming Tuesday morning, like so many others in Ridgehaven. I had my usual routine, a walk to the diner at the corner of Main and Willow, where Mary, the ever-cheerful waitress, greeted me with a steaming cup of black coffee and a plate of pancakes. The diner was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The air was always thick with the smell of bacon and maple syrup, and the hum of conversations was as comforting as a familiar song. That day, however, something was different. There was a tension in the air, subtle but palpable, like the ominous charge before a storm. The first sign of trouble came with the growl of engines. It started faintly, a low rumble in the distance, but quickly grew into a deafening roar as the Steel Wolves arrived. They were a notorious gang, infamous in nearby towns for their violent ways and their disregard for anyone who stood in their path. Their motorcycles glistened under the pale morning sun, and their presence was as menacing as a thundercloud rolling in. Heads turned as they parked their bikes in a chaotic line outside the diner, their leather jackets adorned with snarling wolf emblems that seemed to mock the world around them. The leader, a towering figure with a shaved head and cruel eyes, was the first to enter. His boots thudded against the tiled floor as he surveyed the room like a predator sizing up its prey. Behind him, his crew followed, men and women with hardened faces, each exuding an air of defiance. Conversations hushed, and an uneasy silence fell over the diner. I kept my gaze steady, refusing to let their presence intimidate me. After all, I had faced men with far deadlier intentions in my time, and I wasn't about to let a group of overgrown bullies ruin my morning. They didn't start with me, not right away. At first, their behavior was more of an inconvenience than a threat. They pushed past customers waiting for their orders, laughed too loudly, and barked demands at Mary, who struggled to maintain her composure. "Hurry up with that coffee, sweetheart," one of them sneered, slamming a hand on the counter. Mary shot me a quick glance, her usual warmth replaced by a flicker of fear. It was clear that no one in the diner wanted trouble, but trouble had arrived nonetheless. It wasn't long before their attention turned to me. I suppose I must have caught the leader's eye, sitting there with my weathered hands clasped around my coffee cup, an old man in a worn-out jacket that spoke of simpler times. He walked over with a swagger, his boots squeaking against the floor. "Well, what do we have here?" he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Grandpa enjoying his morning routine?" His crew chuckled behind him, a chorus of disdain that filled the room like toxic smoke. I looked up, meeting his gaze with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Just having my coffee," I replied evenly. "Same as every morning." "Coffee, huh?" he said, leaning closer. His breath smelled of cigarettes and cheap whiskey, a nauseating combination. "Seems to me you're a little too comfortable. Maybe you need to be reminded who's in charge around here." I didn't flinch, though my heart pounded in my chest. "I've lived long enough to know that bullies like you don't stay in charge for long," I said, my voice steady but firm. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by anger. His hand shot out, knocking my coffee cup to the floor where it shattered, the liquid spreading like a dark stain across the tiles. The room was deathly silent. Everyone was watching, their fear palpable. "What did you say to me, old man?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. I straightened in my seat, my back protesting the movement, but my pride refusing to let me cower. "You heard me," I said, "and if you're half as tough as you think you are, you'll take your crew and leave this diner before you embarrass yourself any further." The leader's face twisted in fury, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me. But before he could make his move, the sound of sirens filled the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. The steel wolves exchanged uneasy glances, and the leader straightened, his sneer returning. "This isn't over, old man," he spat before signaling to his crew. They filed out of the diner, their departure as loud and chaotic as their arrival. As the last motorcycle roared away, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Mary rushed over, her face a mixture of concern and gratitude. "Are you okay, Edward?" she asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly as I reached for a napkin to clean up the mess. The other patrons murmured among themselves, their voices a blend of relief and unease. "That was brave," one man said, his tone tinged with admiration. "But you'd better watch your back. Those guys don't take kindly to being challenged." I nodded again, his words ringing in my ears. I knew the steel wolves wouldn't let this go. Men like that thrived on fear, and my refusal to give them the reaction they wanted had likely bruised their fragile egos. But as I looked around the diner at the faces of my friends and neighbors, I knew I couldn't regret standing up to them. Someone had to draw the line, and if it had to be me, so be it. What I didn't know was that this encounter was only the beginning. The steel wolves would be back, and their next move would plunge me and the entire town of Ridgehaven into a battle that would test not just my courage, but the very fabric of our community. The storm had only just begun. As the steel wolves rode away that morning, leaving behind the echoes of their revving engines, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was about to change. Ridgehaven wasn't used to this kind of trouble, and while the town had seen its share of hard times, outright intimidation wasn't something we had faced in years. My mind wandered back to the war, to the times when the stakes were higher and the consequences graver. Back then, I learned one unshakable truth. Strength wasn't in muscle or bravado, it was in resolve. The next day, the calm returned, but it felt fragile. The diner's usual hum had been replaced by nervous whispers. Everyone was on edge, looking over their shoulders as if the gang's shadows loomed over them, even in their absence. I carried on as best I could, keeping to my routines and keeping my head high. I thought I could handle whatever might come, but fate had other plans. Later that week, while walking home from the diner, I noticed a black motorcycle parked just down the street from my house. Its sleek, polished surface caught the sunlight, but it wasn't a beacon of beauty, it was a warning. As I approached, I saw a folded piece of paper taped to the handlebars. I hesitated, but eventually plucked it free, unfolding it to reveal a message written in jagged, aggressive handwriting. "This isn't over. Old man, watch your back." My stomach tightened, but I refused to let fear take hold. I carefully folded the note, pocketed it, and continued home. Inside, I sat at my small kitchen table and stared at the note. Memories of my daughter Rebecca came flooding back. She had always been the fierce one, the fighter. It had been years since we last spoke, too many years. The reasons for our estrangement seemed trivial now, distant echoes of stubborn pride and misunderstandings. Rebecca had left Ridgehaven long ago to pursue a career in law enforcement, eventually becoming an FBI agent. She had her mother's fire and my sense of justice, and I had no doubt she was out there somewhere making the world a better place. For the first time in years, I reached for the old rotary phone on the wall and dialed her number. My hands trembled slightly, but I steadied them. After a few rings, she answered. "Hello." Her voice was calm and professional, but there was an edge of surprise when I spoke her name. "Rebecca," I began, my voice raspier than I intended. "It's your father. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the flood of emotions rushing through her. "Dad," she said, her tone softening. "It's been a while. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I need your help," I finally said, my pride taking a back seat to the urgency of the situation. "There's trouble here in Ridgehaven. A gang, they call themselves the Steel Wolves." She listened intently as I recounted the events of the diner and the threatening note. When I finished, there was a long silence before she spoke again. "I'll be there tomorrow," she said firmly. "Don't do anything reckless. Just stay safe until I arrive." True to her word, Rebecca arrived the next morning, her presence as commanding as ever. She had the same sharp eyes and confident stride I remembered. But there was something else, an air of experience and determination that came from years of facing danger. She embraced me tightly, and for a moment, the weight of the years between us melted away. Over coffee at the kitchen table, she grilled me on every detail of the incident. "These guys don't operate in isolation," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "They're part of a network. Gangs like this usually have ties to something bigger: drugs, weapons, trafficking. If they're here, there's more going on than just harassing locals." Her words stirred a mix of pride and concern in me. Rebecca wasn't just here to protect me. She was already piecing together a larger picture, determined to root out whatever evil had brought the Steel Wolves to our town. Rebecca spent the rest of the day visiting key spots in Ridgehaven, observing the places the gang had been seen and speaking discreetly with locals. She had a knack for getting people to open up, her calm but firm demeanor inspiring trust. By the evening, she returned with a somber expression. "It's worse than I thought," she admitted. "The Steel Wolves aren't just passing through. They've set up a base here, and it's clear they're involved in something big." I overheard rumors about shipments coming through Ridgehaven, illegal ones. I could see the fire in her eyes, the same unyielding determination that had always driven her. She leaned forward, her voice steady. "Dad, I need you to promise me something. If this escalates, you stay out of it. Let me handle it." I wanted to agree, but the words caught in my throat. I had spent my life standing up to injustice, and the thought of sitting idly by while Rebecca faced danger felt wrong. Still, I nodded, hoping to ease her worries. That night I couldn't sleep. My thoughts raced as I sat in my living room, the faint glow of a lamp illuminating the walls lined with old photographs and memories. One picture caught my eye, a black and white snapshot of me in uniform, taken during the war. It reminded me of the sacrifices I had made, the lessons I had learned about courage and resilience. I realized then that my role in this fight wasn't over. Rebecca might be the expert, but I still had something to offer. The next day, Rebecca made her presence known at the diner. When the Steel Wolves returned, she was waiting, her badge clipped to her belt and her demeanor unshakable. The gang's leader sneered when he saw her, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes as she approached. "You think you can waltz into my town and intimidate my father?" she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Think again." The confrontation was brief but intense. Rebecca's training and authority left the gang scrambling to maintain their facade of power. They retreated, but not before making it clear that they wouldn't back down. The battle lines had been drawn, and the fight for Ridgehaven's future was just beginning. As I watched Rebecca stand her ground, I felt a swell of pride. She was everything I had hoped she would become, a force for justice in a world that desperately needed it. But I also knew this was far from over. The Steel Wolves weren't the type to bow out gracefully, and the next move would be theirs. What neither of us knew was how deep the roots of their operation ran and how much danger lay ahead. The Steel Wolves' retreat from the diner was not a victory, it was a warning. Rebecca knew it, and so did I. They weren't the kind of people to let a challenge go unanswered. For the rest of the day, the diner buzzed with hushed conversations. Patrons exchanged theories about what the gang might do next, their voices tinged with fear. Rebecca sat in a corner booth, her notebook open, jotting down observations and piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered. I could see the gears turning in her mind, her FBI training taking over as she tried to stay one step ahead of the gang. But as the hours passed, The tension in the air thickened. The gang hadn't disappeared. They were regrouping, planning their next move. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Ridgehaven in hues of orange and red, it became clear that the wolves would return. And when they did, they wouldn't come to intimidate. They'd come to assert their dominance in the only language they knew: violence. Rebecca insisted on staying at the diner that evening, her presence a deterrent to the gang's usual antics. She stationed herself at the counter, her badge visible and her demeanor calm but watchful. Mary, the waitress, tried to carry on as usual, though her hands trembled as she refilled coffee cups. The other customers kept their voices low, casting wary glances at the door with every jingle of the bell. I stayed too, not because I had to, but because I felt it was where I needed to be. It was around 8 p.m. when the wolves returned. Their arrival was heralded by the guttural roar of engines, a sound that silenced the diner as effectively as a gunshot. One by one, the gang members filed in, their presence filling the small space with an oppressive weight. The leader, the same man who had confronted me days earlier, strode to the center of the room. His lips curled into a sneer as his eyes locked onto Rebecca. Well, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. Looks like the feds have taken an interest in little old Ridgehaven. To what do we owe the honor? Rebecca didn't flinch. She stood slowly, tucking her notebook into her jacket pocket. I'm here because your gang has made it clear you don't belong in this town, she said evenly. Her tone was measured, but there was an edge to it, a warning that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. You've harassed the locals, threatened my father, and disrupted the peace. I suggest you leave before things get worse for you. The leader's eyes narrowed and his crew shifted uneasily behind him. For a moment, I thought he might back down, but then he laughed a cruel, humorless sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said, taking a step closer to Rebecca. But guts don't mean much when you're outnumbered. The tension was suffocating. The other customers sat frozen, their breaths shallow as the gang spread out across the diner. Rebecca stood her ground, her hand resting casually near her belt, not on her weapon, but close enough to remind everyone it was there. I've faced worse odds, Rebecca replied calmly, and I've always come out on top. The leader's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of doubt. He glanced around the room, his bravado slipping as he realized that Rebecca wasn't bluffing. But he wasn't ready to walk away without making a statement. With a snap of his fingers, two of his men advanced toward the counter where Mary stood, her face pale with fear. Before they could reach her, Rebecca moved. In one fluid motion, she drew her weapon and leveled it at the leader. That's far enough, she said, her voice cold and commanding. The gang members froze, their bravado crumbling under the weight of her authority. The leader raised his hands, feigning innocence. Easy there, agent, he said, his tone mocking. We're just here for a little chat. Your chat ends now, Rebecca replied. You and your crew have 5 seconds to leave this diner in this town. If I see any of you here again. For a moment, no one moved. The air crackled with tension, every eye in the room fixed on Rebecca and the gang leader. Then, slowly, he lowered his hands and stepped back. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. You've made yourself a target. Agent, you and your old man. With that, he turned and stalked out of the diner, his crew following reluctantly behind him. The doors slammed shut and the roar of their engines faded into the night. For a few seconds, the diner remained silent, the gravity of what had just happened sinking in. Then, slowly, the tension began to ease. Mary let out a shaky breath, and the other customers started murmuring their relief. Rebecca holstered her weapon and turned to me. They'll be back, she said quietly, her eyes filled with determination. But next time, I'll be ready. I nodded, my heart swelling with pride and concern. Rebecca had stood her ground and protected the town, but it was clear that the fight was far from over. The wolves weren't the type to take humiliation lightly, and their leader's parting words echoed in my mind like a sinister promise. That night, as Rebecca and I walked home together, the stars above us seemed dimmer, their light obscured by the shadows of what was to come. The wolves had drawn a line in the sand, and we knew they wouldn't stop until they reclaimed what they saw as theirs. But Rebecca wasn't alone in this fight. And neither was I. What we didn't know yet was that the wolves were only a small piece of a much larger puzzle, one that would challenge us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. The next battle wouldn't be fought in the diner, it would be fought in the shadows, where the true danger lay waiting. The following morning, Rebecca dove headfirst into her investigation, determined to uncover the steel wolf's purpose in Ridgehaven. As I watched her work from the kitchen table, her focus reminded me of the tactical precision I had once seen in soldiers preparing for battle. She had spread out a series of maps, police reports, and scribbled notes, her fingers tracing connections between incidents that seemed random to the untrained eye. "They're not here by accident," she muttered, mostly to herself. "This town is too small for them to care about unless there's something bigger going on." Her voice carried a weight that hinted at the storm brewing just beyond the horizon, leaving me to wonder how deep their influence ran. Little did we know, her suspicions were about to be confirmed in ways we couldn't have imagined. Rebecca's first breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Mary, the diner's waitress. After overhearing some of the gang's conversations during their visits, Mary had pieced together fragments of their plans. "They keep talking about the docks," she told Rebecca, her voice trembling as she recounted what she had heard. Something about shipments coming in late at night. Rebecca's brow furrowed as she listened, her mind already working through the implications. "Ridgehaven doesn't have an active port," she said thoughtfully. "If they're using docks, it means they've found a hidden route to move goods. It also means they're trafficking something dangerous." Mary's information became the first piece of a puzzle that would soon reveal a network far more sinister than anyone in Ridgehaven had anticipated. Later that evening, Rebecca and I drove to the edge of town, where an old, disused dock jutted out into the murky waters of the Ridgehaven River. The wooden planks creaked underfoot as we approached, the air thick with the scent of algae and decay. "This place has been abandoned for years," I said, my voice low. "What could they possibly be doing out here?" Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pointed to a set of fresh tire tracks leading toward the dock's edge. "They've been here recently," she said, crouching down to examine the marks. "And they've been careful, no lights, no obvious signs of activity. They're hiding something." Her discovery set off a chain of events that would pull us deeper into the wolf's web, with dangers lurking in every shadow. As Rebecca investigated further, she unearthed a pattern that painted a chilling picture. The steel wolves weren't just a gang. They were pawns in a larger operation involving illegal arms and human trafficking. Shipments passed through Ridgehaven en route to cities where they could be sold or distributed under the radar. The wolves were the muscle, ensuring the goods moved without interference. "This isn't just about Ridgehaven," Rebecca told me one night, her voice heavy with anger and resolve. "This is part of a network spanning states, maybe even countries. If we don't stop them here, they'll keep exploiting towns like ours, preying on people who can't fight back." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, one that neither of us could ignore. But the wolves weren't content to let Rebecca dig deeper into their affairs. Their retaliation came swiftly and brutally. One night, while I sat reading in my living room, a loud crash shattered the stillness. I rushed to the window to see flames licking at the side of my garage, the unmistakable roar of motorcycles fading into the distance. Rebecca was at my side in moments, her eyes scanning the scene with the practiced calm of someone who had seen far worse. "They're trying to scare us," she said, her jaw tight. "But all they've done is confirm we're on the right track." The fire, though contained before it spread, was a stark reminder of the wolves' capacity for destruction, leaving us to brace for what they might do next. Despite their threats, Rebecca pressed on, her determination unshaken. She contacted old colleagues in law enforcement, sharing the evidence she had gathered and requesting resources to build a case against the wolves. "We need to dismantle this network from the ground up," she explained during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "That means hitting them where it hurts, their supply lines, their finances, and their connections to the bigger players pulling the strings." As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride mixed with unease. Rebecca was fearless, but the enemies she was taking on were ruthless, and their reach extended far beyond what we could see. The danger ahead felt insurmountable, but it was a battle we couldn't afford to lose. Rebecca's persistence soon bore fruit in the form of a crucial lead. A truck driver caught transporting illegal goods had been arrested in a nearby town, and under questioning, he revealed a connection to the Steel Wolves. "They're expecting a major shipment tomorrow night," he confessed, his voice trembling as he spilled details of the operation. "It's coming through the Ridgehaven docks. Weapons, cash, maybe even people. They're bringing it all." Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she absorbed the information, her mind already racing to formulate a plan. "This is our chance," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "We stop this shipment, and we cut them off at the knees." Her words carried a sense of urgency that electrified the air, signaling the start of the most critical phase of our fight. As Rebecca prepared for the operation, she reached out to a trusted ally in the FBI, securing backup for what was sure to be a dangerous confrontation. Meanwhile, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The quiet life I had known in Ridgehaven had been upended, replaced by a battle that seemed almost too big for one small town to face. But as I watched Rebecca organize her plans with unwavering determination, I realized that we were far from alone. The courage she displayed inspired not just me, but also the people of Ridgehaven, who were beginning to rally behind her efforts. It was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, unity and resolve could make all the difference. As the sun set on Ridgehaven that night, the town seemed to hold its breath, bracing for the storm to come. The Wolves' network had been exposed, their plans laid bare, but the final confrontation still loomed large. "Tomorrow, we take the fight to them," Rebecca said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. "No more waiting, no more hiding. We end this." Her words were both a promise and a rallying cry, setting the stage for the battle that would decide not just the fate of Ridgehaven, but the lives of countless others. Little did we know, the next 24 hours would bring revelations and challenges that would test us in ways we never expected. The night of the operation arrived with an eerie stillness that seemed to blanket Ridgehaven. Rebecca had spent the day preparing, her movements precise and deliberate as she coordinated with her FBI contacts and finalized the plan. The goal was simple but perilous: intercept the shipment, gather enough evidence to dismantle the Steel Wolves network, and arrest their key players. Yet, as Rebecca outlined the details to me, I couldn't ignore the heaviness in her voice, the way her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. She knew the risks as well as I did. This wasn't just about logistics, it was about survival. Her determination to see justice prevail left me both proud and deeply unsettled, and I resolved to do everything in my power to support her, even if it meant stepping into danger myself. The night's events would determine not just our future, but the legacy of what we stood for. As darkness fell, we moved into position near the docks. Rebecca's team, a small but capable group of federal agents, blended into the shadows, their radios crackling softly as they communicated updates. The air was thick with anticipation, every creak of the wooden dock amplified in the stillness. From my vantage point, I could see the steel-gray water reflecting the dim light of a distant street lamp. The wolves were expected any moment, and Rebecca's voice in my ear, calm, focused, unyielding, was both a comfort and a reminder of the stakes. "Remember," she said through the earpiece she had insisted I wear, "stay back and stay safe. Let us handle this." But I couldn't shake the feeling that fate had other plans for me that night, plans that would test the limits of my courage. Little did I know, the wolves were about to reveal just how ruthless they could be. The first sound of motorcycles broke the silence, the low rumble growing louder as the wolves approached. From the shadows, we watched as their convoy rolled into the dockyard, headlights cutting through the darkness. The leader, his figure unmistakable even in the dim light, dismounted and barked orders to his crew. Behind them, a large truck rumbled into view, its size and reinforced exterior suggesting it carried far more than ordinary cargo. Rebecca gave the signal, her voice steady as she coordinated the agents to close in. "Wait for my command," she whispered, her eyes locked on the scene before her. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity as we waited for the perfect moment to strike. But as the wolves began unloading the truck, A sharp movement caught Rebecca's eye, something unexpected that would complicate everything. Among the crates being unloaded was a group of frightened, disheveled individuals, their hands bound and their faces pale with terror. Rebecca's jaw tightened as she realized the wolves were trafficking people alongside weapons and drugs. "They've escalated this," she said, her voice colder than I'd ever heard. "We can't let them get away." Her agents nodded in silent agreement, their resolve unwavering as they prepared to intervene. But the wolves, always wary, seemed to sense something was amiss. One of their lookouts spotted movement in the shadows, raising the alarm with a shout that echoed across the dockyard. Chaos erupted in an instant, and the wolves drew their weapons, ready for a fight. Rebecca's voice cut through the commotion as she commanded her team into action. But the element of surprise was gone, and the wolves were prepared to defend their operation at all costs. The battle that followed would test every ounce of strength and ingenuity we had. The sound of gunfire rang out, sharp and deafening against the night. Rebecca's team moved with precision, taking cover and returning fire as they worked to secure the area. I watched from a safe distance, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and helplessness. But as the fight raged on, I noticed something the wolves hadn't accounted for: an old maintenance shed on the edge of the dockyard, its position offering a vantage point over their operation. Without hesitation, I made my way toward it, careful to stay out of sight. My military training, long dormant but never forgotten, guided my steps as I reached the shed and found a rusted ladder leading to the roof. From there, I could see the entire dockyard, including the wolves' leader shouting commands to his crew. He was the linchpin of their operation, and I knew what I had to do. What I didn't realize was how much danger my actions would draw toward me. Using a length of rope I found in the shed, I devised a plan to disable the leader and disrupt his control over the situation. As he barked orders, I waited for the right moment, my grip steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. When the time came, I dropped the rope from above, tangling it around his arms and pulling him off balance. He hit the ground with a grunt, and his crew's attention shifted, momentarily breaking their coordination. Rebecca's team seized the opportunity, advancing on the wolves and gaining the upper hand. But my actions hadn't gone unnoticed. One of the gang members spotted me and shouted, raising his weapon. Before I could react, a gunshot rang out, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. I staggered, gripping the edge of the shed for support, but I refused to let the pain stop me. Little did I know, my actions had set the stage for Rebecca to deliver the final blow. Rebecca saw me fall, and her eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and fury. "Cover me!" she shouted to her team as she advanced toward the wolves' leader, who was still struggling to free himself from the rope. With swift, calculated movements, she disarmed him and pinned him to the ground, her weapon trained on him as she barked orders to the remaining gang members. "Drop your weapons and surrender," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. One by one, the wolves complied, their bravado shattered as their leader lay defeated. Rebecca's agents moved in to secure the area, their efficiency ensuring no one escaped. As the dust settled, the dockyard fell silent once more, the wolves' reign of terror brought to an end. But for Rebecca, the sight of me injured was a harsh reminder of the cost of our fight. What neither of us could foresee was that this victory was just the beginning of an even greater battle to expose the corruption behind the wolves' operation. The aftermath of the battle at the dock was a blur of motion and emotion. The wolves were subdued, their operation disrupted, but Rebecca's focus remained razor-sharp as she oversaw the arrests and coordinated the rescue of the trafficked individuals. Amid the chaos, I leaned against the maintenance shed, pressing my hand to the gunshot wound in my side. The pain was sharp but bearable, and I reminded myself that I had faced worse in my time. Rebecca's face appeared above me moments later, her expression a mixture of relief and anger. "You should have stayed back," she said, crouching to inspect my injury, her hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her. "You could have been killed." Her words carried a weight of worry, but beneath them, I caught a flicker of pride. My actions had helped turn the tide of the confrontation, but the cost was not yet fully realized. The wolves had been captured, but their silence hinted at secrets still untold. As the ambulances and law enforcement vehicles arrived, the scene transformed into a hive of activity. Medics tended to my wound, their voices calm but urgent as they reassured me that the injury wasn't life-threatening. Nearby, Rebecca questioned the Wolves' leader, her voice firm and unyielding as she sought answers about the network they served. "You've lost this battle," she told him, her words cutting through his defiant silence. "But you can still make it easier for yourself. Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings?" The leader smirked despite the blood trickling from a cut on his lip, his defiance as resolute as Rebecca's determination. "You think this is over?" he sneered, his voice low but chilling. "You've barely scratched the surface." His words sent a shiver through me as I lay on the stretcher, a reminder that the wolves were just one piece of a much larger and more dangerous puzzle. That night, back at home, Rebecca paced the living room, her thoughts spinning as she pieced together the fragments of the case. The wolves' operation had been dismantled, but the network they served remained a looming threat. "There's more to this," she said, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. "The wolves were too organized, too connected. Someone powerful is backing them, and they won't stop just because we took out a few foot soldiers." I nodded from my place on the couch, my side bandaged and sore, but my mind sharp. "Then we keep digging," I said simply, my tone firm. "If they think Ridgehaven was an easy target, we'll show them just how wrong they are." Rebecca paused, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of admiration and determination. The fight wasn't over, and we both knew the stakes were higher than ever. What we didn't yet realize was that the wolves' defeat had set off a chain reaction, one that would bring unexpected allies and enemies to our doorstep. Over the next few days, Rebecca worked tirelessly, her connections within the FBI proving invaluable as she traced the wolves' ties to a larger criminal network. She uncovered evidence of political bribery, money laundering, and a string of corrupt officials who had enabled the operation to thrive undetected for years. Each discovery brought us closer to understanding the magnitude of the threat, but it also painted a grim picture of the challenges ahead. "This isn't just about Ridgehaven," she explained during one of our late-night discussions. "This network spans across states, maybe even countries. We're up against something massive." Her words hung heavy in the air, but I refused to let doubt take root. "Massive or not," I replied, "they're not invincible. They made a mistake when they came here, and we'll make sure they pay for it." My resolve seemed to strengthen Rebecca's, but the growing danger was a constant reminder of the risks we faced. The deeper we dug, the more enemies we unearthed. One of those enemies revealed themselves in a chilling manner. A letter arrived at our door, its envelope unmarked, but its contents unmistakably threatening. Inside was a photograph of Rebecca and me taken outside the diner, accompanied by a single line scrawled in bold letters: "Stop digging or you'll regret it." Rebecca's jaw tightened as she studied the photo, her mind already working through the implications. "They know we're getting close," she said, her voice calm but tinged with steel. "This is their way of trying to scare us off." I placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture meant to steady her, but also to remind her that she wasn't alone. "We've faced worse," I said simply, my tone unwavering. "They can threaten all they want. It won't stop us." My words were met with a determined nod from Rebecca, but the threat lingered, a shadow that loomed over our every move. What we didn't yet realize was that the network's reach extended farther than we'd anticipated, and their retaliation was just beginning. Despite the danger, Rebecca pressed forward, her investigation uncovering a key piece of evidence, a financial trail linking the wolves to a high-ranking senator. The discovery was both shocking and galvanizing, revealing the depth of the corruption we were fighting. "This explains why they've been so bold," Rebecca said, her voice carrying both anger and resolve. "They had protection from the very people who are supposed to uphold the law." The revelation strengthened her determination to bring the entire operation down, but it also raised the stakes exponentially. Taking on a senator meant exposing ourselves to even greater risks, and the enemies we faced would stop at nothing to protect their interests. As Rebecca prepared to confront the senator, I couldn't shake the feeling that our fight was about to escalate in ways we couldn't yet predict. The wolves had fallen, but the shadows they served were far from defeated. What lay ahead would test our courage, our resolve, and our very belief in justice itself. Rebecca didn't hesitate. The evidence linking the steel wolves to Senator Aldridge was irrefutable bank transfers, coded emails, and surveillance footage of meetings between gang members and the senator's staff. This was no coincidence. Aldridge wasn't just complicit. He was orchestrating the operation, using his influence to shield the network while profiting from its crimes. "This is bigger than anything I've dealt with," Rebecca admitted as we reviewed the files at the kitchen table late one night. Her voice was steady, but the furrow in her brow betrayed the weight she carried. "But we can't let fear stop us. If we expose him, we can bring down the entire network." Her determination was contagious, but as I watched her plan the next steps, I couldn't help but feel the storm brewing on the horizon. Aldridge wasn't the type to go down quietly, and his resources would make him a formidable enemy. The fight to expose him would take us into uncharted territory, where every move carried life-altering consequences. The first step was securing more evidence, and Rebecca's connections within the FBI proved invaluable. Using a network of trusted allies, she orchestrated a covert operation to infiltrate Aldridge's inner circle. It wasn't long before they uncovered even more damning proof. Records of meetings held at his private estate, logs of payments to shell companies, and communications with international figures tied to trafficking rings. Each discovery painted a darker picture, one that left even Rebecca's seasoned colleagues shaken. "This isn't just about money or power," one of her contacts confided during a secure call. "It's about control. Aldridge and his people want to dominate every aspect of this trade, and they'll destroy anyone who gets in their way." The words hung in the air like a warning, but Rebecca's resolve only deepened. "Then we take away their control," she replied, her voice filled with quiet fury. The plan was in motion, but the risks were growing by the hour, and the shadows seemed to creep closer with every revelation. One night, as Rebecca pieced together the final steps of her operation, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Tom Harper, Ridgehaven's longtime lawman, knocked on our door with a solemn expression. "I've been hearing things," he said, his tone low but earnest as we invited him in. "Word's spreading that you're going after Aldridge. You need to be careful. The man has friends in places you don't want enemies." Harper's warning carried the weight of experience, and for a moment, even Rebecca seemed to pause. "I appreciate the concern," she said finally, her voice steady but respectful. "But this is too big to ignore. If we let him continue, more lives will be destroyed." Harper nodded, his face lined with worry. "Then count me in," he said firmly. "This town has seen enough of people like him. Whatever you need, I'll back you." His offer of support was a beacon of hope, but it also underscored the gravity of the battle ahead. Aldridge's power extended far beyond Ridgehaven, and taking him down would require not just courage, but precision. What none of us anticipated was how close his reach had already come. The retaliation came swiftly and without warning. One evening, as Rebecca finalized her evidence package for federal prosecutors, a car sped past our house, its tires screeching on the quiet street. Seconds later, the unmistakable sound of shattering glass echoed through the air as a brick crashed through the front window, landing in the middle of the living room. Rebecca moved instantly, her instincts kicking in as she pulled me to the floor and scanned the street for signs of the perpetrators. The brick was wrapped in a piece of paper with a single message scrawled in bold black ink: "Drop it. Last warning." It was clear that Aldridge's people knew we were closing in, and their threats were escalating. "They're trying to rattle us," Rebecca said, her voice cold but steady as she examined the note. "But they've made a mistake. They've just confirmed how desperate they are." Her words carried an edge of defiance, but I could see the tension in her posture. The enemy was closing in, and the danger was no longer just theoretical. The fight had come to our doorstep, and the stakes had never been higher. Despite the threats, Rebecca pressed on, her resolve unshaken. She coordinated with federal agents to plan a raid on Aldridge's estate, timing it to coincide with a high-profile gathering of his associates. The operation was as bold as it was dangerous, designed to catch them off guard and secure irrefutable evidence of their crimes. As the day of the raid approached, Rebecca's focus became laser-sharp, her confidence unwavering even as the risks mounted. "This is it," she said the night before, her eyes meeting mine across the table. "Once we do this, there's no turning back. But if we succeed, we can end this for good." Her words were both a promise and a plea for understanding, and I nodded, my trust in her unshakable. What we didn't know was that Aldridge had anticipated our move and had set a trap of his own, one that would push us to the brink and test the limits of our courage. The morning of the raid arrived with a tense, almost unnatural stillness. Rebecca's team was ready, their plan meticulously crafted to dismantle Aldridge's network in one decisive blow. At the heart of the operation was a coordinated strike on his estate and associated locations, aiming to seize documents, apprehend key players, and liberate anyone caught in the grip of the trafficking ring. As she loaded her gear, I saw a steely determination in her eyes, a mix of exhaustion and resolve that spoke of the burdens she carried. "I'll be back before you know it," she assured me, her hand resting on my shoulder for a moment longer than usual. But her tone couldn't mask the tension in her voice. We both knew this raid would be the tipping point. What neither of us could have predicted was how the town of Ridgehaven would rise to join the fight, turning the tide in ways no one had anticipated. As Rebecca and the agents made their move, Ridgehaven became a hive of activity. The wolves might have been defeated, but their threats lingered, and the town had had enough. Inspired by Rebecca's bravery and fueled by years of quiet frustration, locals began taking action. Mary from the diner organized a watch group, ensuring no suspicious vehicles entered town unnoticed. Sheriff Harper rallied his deputies, coordinating with Rebecca's team to provide backup and secure potential escape routes. Even the high school principal, a reserved man known more for his quiet demeanor than bold action, stepped forward to lend his resources, turning the gym into a temporary coordination center. For the first time in years, Ridgehaven felt united, its people shedding fear and embracing a shared purpose. What started as a defensive measure quickly became a rallying cry, a force that Rebecca would soon realize was her greatest ally. Meanwhile, at Aldridge's estate, the raid unfolded with a mix of precision and chaos. Agents stormed the grounds, their movements swift and deliberate, as they neutralized guards and secured the perimeter. Rebecca led the charge, her instincts sharp as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the estate, each turn revealing new layers of the senator's corruption. Hidden rooms lined with cash, ledgers detailing illicit transactions, and even a secure vault containing incriminating video footage, all of it painted a damning portrait of Aldridge's operations. But as Rebecca moved deeper into the estate, she realized something was wrong. The air felt charged, and her instincts screamed that they were walking into a trap. Her fears were confirmed when an explosion rocked the West Wing, sending debris raining down and cutting off part of the team. Rebecca's radio crackled to life with frantic voices, and she knew they were running out of time. The raid had become a race against the clock, and the stakes had never been higher. Back in Ridgehaven, the townspeople's efforts bore unexpected fruit. One of Mary's watch group members spotted an unfamiliar black SUV parked near the outskirts of town. Suspicious, they alerted Sheriff Harper, who arrived to find two men hurriedly transferring boxes into an unmarked van. Harper's team intercepted them, uncovering a cache of counterfeit passports, stolen artifacts, and financial records. The men, under pressure, confessed they were part of Aldridge's cleanup crew, sent to destroy evidence and relocate assets before the raid. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community as word spread of the townspeople's role in uncovering a critical piece of the puzzle. For the first time, the people of Ridgehaven felt empowered, their collective efforts proving that even ordinary citizens could stand up to extraordinary threats. Their newfound resolve would soon prove instrumental in Rebecca's fight, though none of them could have anticipated how pivotal their actions would become. At the estate, Rebecca pressed forward despite the explosion, determined to reach the heart of Aldridge's operations. She found him in a hidden bunker beneath the main house, surrounded by monitors displaying live feeds of the raid. He was calm, almost smug, his confidence unshaken even as agents secured his guards and confiscated his files. "You think this changes anything?" He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "People like me don't fall, we adapt." But Rebecca wasn't fazed. "Your time's up," she replied, her voice cutting through his arrogance. "Your network is crumbling, and the people you've hurt will finally see justice." Aldridge laughed, his eyes cold and calculating. "Justice? You have no idea how deep this goes. Arrest me, and 10 more will take my place." His words were meant to instill doubt, but Rebecca stood firm, her resolve unshaken. As she placed him in cuffs, she knew this was just the beginning. Aldridge's network was vast, but this victory was a critical first step in dismantling it piece by piece. As the raid concluded and the last of Aldridge's associates were taken into custody, Rebecca returned to Ridgehaven to find a town transformed. The people, once fearful and fragmented, had come together in a way that defied their quiet history. Harper greeted her with a smile, holding up the evidence they had uncovered from the van. "Looks like your town's got some fight in it," he said, his tone filled with pride. Rebecca nodded, her gaze sweeping over the gathered townsfolk. "It's not just my fight anymore," she said softly. "It's all of ours." The weight of the battle still loomed, but in that moment, the unity of Ridgehaven shone brighter than the threats they faced. Together, they had struck a blow against corruption, and their newfound strength would carry them forward into the next chapter of their fight. But as Rebecca looked out at the crowd, a question lingered in her mind. What other secrets might Aldridge's network still hold, and how far would they have to go to uncover them? The weeks following the raid were a wind of activity. Aldridge's arrest made headlines, shaking the foundations of trust in the very institutions meant to protect the people. As Rebecca coordinated with federal prosecutors, her determination to dismantle the network never wavered. Ridgehaven had become a hub of hope and resolve, its residents continuing to assist in piecing together the evidence from Aldridge's files. The once quiet town was now alive with purpose, but the danger had not disappeared. Reports began surfacing of shadowy figures lingering on the outskirts of town, vehicles with tinted windows parked in unusual places. It was clear that Aldridge's allies weren't ready to relinquish their control without a fight. The network might have suffered a devastating blow, but it wasn't defeated. The final reckoning was drawing closer, and it would require every ounce of courage and unity the town could muster. As the investigation unfolded, Rebecca discovered a chilling revelation buried within Aldridge's files: a fortified compound deep in the mountains, serving as the operational headquarters for the remaining members of the network. The compound wasn't just a hideout, it was a stronghold, equipped with advanced surveillance, armed guards, and high-tech defenses. It was there that the final pieces of the network's operations were managed, from human trafficking routes to financial laundering. Rebecca gathered her team for a briefing, her voice steady but resolute as she outlined the risks. "This isn't just about taking down a building," she said, her gaze meeting each of theirs. "It's about ending this for good. If we don't act now, they'll rebuild stronger than ever." Her words left no room for hesitation, but even she couldn't ignore the gravity of the task ahead. The compound represented the heart of the network, and confronting it meant stepping into the lion's den. The plan to infiltrate the compound was ambitious, relying on a combination of stealth, strategy, and sheer determination. Rebecca's team would approach under the cover of darkness, using intelligence gathered from Aldridge's files to navigate the defenses. Meanwhile, back in Ridgehaven, the townspeople prepared for the possibility of retaliation. Sheriff Harper organized patrols, and volunteers took shifts watching the roads, determined to protect their home. I joined the effort despite Rebecca's protests, insisting that my experience from the war made me an asset. "This fight isn't just yours," I told her firmly. "It's ours, and I won't sit on the sidelines while you face it alone." She didn't argue, though I saw the worry in her eyes. The bond between us had grown stronger through this ordeal, and the thought of losing each other weighed heavily on us both. What neither of us could predict was just how much the coming battle would test that bond and the strength of everyone involved. The night of the operation arrived, the air thick with tension as Rebecca's team made their final preparations. Their approach to the compound was swift and silent, their movements honed by weeks of planning. From my position in Ridgehaven, monitoring their progress through a secure line, I could hear the urgency in Rebecca's voice as she coordinated the effort. "We're inside the perimeter," she whispered, her tone a mix of focus and resolve. "No sign of resistance yet, but stay sharp." The initial entry went smoothly, but as the team moved deeper into the compound, the atmosphere shifted. Alarms blared, floodlights pierced the darkness, and armed guards emerged from hidden positions. The compound's defenses had been triggered, and what had begun as a covert operation quickly turned into an all-out battle. Rebecca's commands rang out over the comms, directing her team as they fought to hold their ground. The sound of gunfire echoed in my ears, a stark reminder of the stakes. The compound was fighting back with everything it had, and Rebecca's team was caught in the crossfire. Back in Ridgehaven, the situation took a dark turn. Reports began filtering in of vehicles approaching the town, their occupants clearly intent on retaliation. Sheriff Harper and his deputies mobilized, setting up roadblocks and calling on the townspeople to prepare. I joined the effort, my instincts from years past taking over as I helped coordinate the defenses. The townsfolk stood firm, their unity stronger than their fear. "They think they can scare us," Harper said, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd. "But this town isn't theirs to take." His words were met with nods of agreement and determined faces. But the tension was palpable. The enemy was closing in, and we could only hope that Rebecca's mission would succeed before the fight reached our doorstep. Little did we know, the battle for the compound was far from over, and the stakes were about to reach a fever pitch. Inside the compound, Rebecca and her team pushed forward, their resolve unwavering despite the chaos. They secured critical evidence, including encrypted drives and communication logs that tied the network to powerful figures across the globe. But as they moved to extract the files, a final line of defense activated, an automated system designed to destroy the evidence and trap intruders. "We're running out of time," Rebecca shouted over the comms, her voice strained but determined. "We need to get this data out, or everything we've done will mean nothing." Her team worked frantically, bypassing security measures and transferring the files to secure devices. The compound's self-destruction countdown began, each second a reminder of the danger they faced. With moments to spare, they succeeded, escaping as the facility erupted in flames behind them. Rebecca's voice crackled through the comms, her relief evident despite her exhaustion. "We got it," she said. "The evidence is secure." But as I heard her words, a new wave of tension gripped me. The compound might have fallen, but the retaliation on Ridgehaven was still unfolding, and our fight was far from over. What you've just heard is a story of courage, resilience, and the power of unity in the face of overwhelming darkness. It's a reminder that even in our quietest moments, we can rise above fear and fight for what's right. But this isn't just Edward and Rebecca's story. It's a story for all of us. A story about standing up to injustice and proving that no challenge is too great when we come together. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit the subscribe button and join our community dedicated to sharing tales of inspiration and hope. And while you're here, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, or declare your own stand for justice. Let's start with this. I choose courage, and together we stand for what's right. Make sure to check out our other videos, where we explore powerful stories of human triumph, resilience, and compassion. Whether it's a tale of overcoming impossible odds or the simple kindness that changes lives, there's something here to inspire everyone. Together, we can create a world where courage and empathy shine brighter than fear. Thank you for watching, and remember, every act of bravery begins with a single step.